All right, former President Donald J. Trump is the subject of a criminal investigation regarding classified documents. Let's get into the details. My name is Jamahl Kersey. I'm the principal attorney at Kersey Law, a boutique criminal defense firm in San Diego, California. And in this video, we're talking about Donald Trump's issue with these documents. You know, it's been all over the news headlines. And so one thing that I want to talk about first is that, hey, this has been all over the news, but the reason it's been all over the news is because of the sensitive nature of these documents that are involved and the bigger issues that we're dealing with a former president. And so the reality is Trump has not, obviously he's not been arrested. He hasn't been charged. There hasn't been a filing of a complaint. So this is very early on. We're still in the investigatory stage. And so obviously, if he does get charged, he enjoys the presumption of innocence. And so, again, just like any person accused of a crime, he's innocent unless and until he's proven guilty. And so just want to get that out of the way. But if you've been wondering what's going on, I'll try and fill you in a little bit. And, because this is an ongoing investigation and the sensitive nature of what's going on, there's not a whole lot of information out there, but of the information that I've read, I'm just going to give that to you. And hopefully, that'll fill you in on some of the doubts and curiosities that you might have had on this issue. So we start with the Presidential Records Act. All right. And so under the Presidential Records Act, all official materials, so documents, emails, those are considered to be government property. So while they're in the possession of the president during his presidency, that's not the president's, not Donald Trump or any past president's property. This is government property. And at the end of a president's term, they're supposed to turn over the materials to the National Archives. And apparently the problem with this situation is that Donald Trump allegedly did not turn over everything that he was supposed to turn over to the National Archives. At some point, the National Archives officials got word that there were over 20 boxes of presidential records materials that were just laying around in the White House for months. And so, again, under the Presidential Records Act, this stuff is supposed to be turned over to the National Archives. This didn't happen. So the archives officials ended up reaching out to Trump's people. Hey, they're saying, hey, these documents, they caught wind that these documents weren't turned in. And so they're working with Trump's representatives to get these documents back. And so apparently there were discussions between Trump and his representatives about giving these documents back. And he was pretty resistant and even kind of took the tone of like, nah, these documents are mine. And so it's been said that Trump is really big on keeping, mementos and the like. And so you'd imagine that some of these letters and documents and all this kind of stuff would be kind of cool to hold on to. But hey, again, under the Presidential Records Act, all this stuff needed to be turned back in. And so with Trump kind of brushing off these requests, and I imagine that there were numerous phone calls and emails and letters and conversations. I mean, for it to get to where it's gotten to, where you have, FBI agents executing search warrants. I mean, you just imagine they probably did everything that they could in order to get these documents back. Since Trump's holding on to this information, the government basically took the position that, hey, you're really being too laxed, too nonchalant about documents that are highly sensitive in nature, or you might be being untruthful or dishonest about the situation, or a combination of both. Either way, we need to get involved and do something about the situation. So in January of this year, Trump ended up turning over 15 boxes to the National Archives. And these boxes had over 150 classified documents, right? And so there were documents from the CIA, from the NSA, so the National Security Agency, and the FBI. And the topics of these documents were of national security interest. And so, the specific nature of these sensitive materials hasn't been revealed. And, quite frankly, they should not be revealed, right? So I have no business knowing what was in those documents. I don't want to know. I don't need to know. And you don't need to know either. I mean, these are confidential documents for a reason. And we're talking about communications and materials that, are really for the president and high level individuals' eyes only. Again, because of the sensitive nature of these documents, the National Archives officials were just really concerned. So this ended up getting turned over to the Justice Department. If you can just imagine, at the end of a presidential term, they turn over their documents, the National Archives receives the materials. These things I would imagine, and again, I don't specialize in dealing with issues with National Archives, Justice Department's handling of, presidential records. So this is all new to me, but just in kind of putting these pieces together, you'd imagine that the Justice Department doesn't usually get involved in these situations, but this ended up happening. And so the Justice Department ends up conducting an investigation regarding whether Trump improperly handled government records, by taking them over to Mar-a-Lago. So they end up conducting their interviews there. They interview witnesses. And then in May, there was a grand jury subpoena issued for the return of any of the remaining classified material. So again, there was a turning over, a delivery of documents by Trump in January, but then in May, there was a subpoena in order to get the rest of any outstanding material. There was a visit by Justice Department officials. They end up going to Mar-a-Lago. And in June, there were more documents turned over. And so this initially started with National Archives officials trying to get these documents to, which would be, let's just say, a civil in nature issue, to then them turning this over to the Justice Department for an actual criminal investigation. And so it's reported that Trump's legal team repeatedly tried to stall the archives from basically allowing the FBI and intelligence officials to review the materials. Basically, they were saying, hey, he needs more time to, review and analyze the situation in order to determine if any of these records fall under some sort of executive privilege that would allow him to hold on to these records or not turn them over. And at some point, we know that we get a search warrant, and that search warrant is ultimately executed. And so, FBI agents could not just, roll into Mar-a-Lago and start, taking stuff. They had to actually get a warrant. And so, as I think about this situation, we're talking about a former president being part of a criminal investigation and agents and federal prosecutors working together to ultimately apply for a search warrant to search a former president's private property. This is, I've never heard of anything like this in all my years as a defense attorney or in my life in general. I don't think. What would have to happen is, the FBI agents and the prosecutors would, there had to be a lot of getting ducks in a row, so to speak, if you know that you are applying for a search warrant of a former president's private property. In order to get the search warrant, they have to put together an affidavit. So they draft an affidavit, and that affidavit is going to have the violations they believe to have happened. It's going to have the statement of where the items are that they want to retrieve and what those items are. And so once they have that probable cause statement, they're then going to take that over to a federal judge. So the federal judge has to actually review that declaration, that statement. And if there's any doubts or anything like that, then he can ask the agent, to go under oath, and questions can be, asked of this agent in order to, resolve any doubts that the judge might have. And I imagine that, the judge probably went into this like, hey, seeing the name on there, hey, you're asking for a warrant to search a former president's private property. This had to be, airtight in terms of the declaration, because this eventually, as it has, was going to create a huge buzz and be subject to just intense scrutiny, not only just the public perception of the situation, but also just keeping in mind that if criminal charges were filed, the warrant could be subject to being challenged. And so if on some level they find that there wasn't actually probable cause, or there was some sort of other issue with the warrant for it to be attacked, then everything that the agents ultimately seized pursuant to the warrant could all be thrown out. And though that could end up being the subject of a motion to suppress, and then everything that they worked hard to seize could end up being thrown out. So I imagine that, everything was gone through with a fine tooth comb from, the top to the bottom, from the FBI agents to the U.S. attorneys involved to, actually we know that the Attorney General, so the highest prosecutor in the United States, ended up signing off on the efforts to seek the warrant. So, they were going to have their ducks in a row. And then also the judge knowing, hey, when I sign off on this, there is going to be a search warrant executed on a former president's property. So I need to make sure that I'm fully satisfied that there's absolutely probable cause for this warrant to be issued. And so we know that on August 8th, FBI agents ultimately executed the search warrant at Mar-a-Lago, and they came back with 26 boxes, including 11 sets of material marked as classified. And one set of these documents had the highest level of classification, top secret, sensitive, compartmented information. And so, it's said that this designation is for the country's most important secrets that, if revealed publicly, could cause exceptionally grave damage to U.S. national security. And so, all this stuff is news to me. Again, as a defense attorney, I primarily deal with domestic violence, sex crimes, murders, robberies, all those different type of things. When we're venturing into the area of, top secret classifications, Presidential Records Act, Espionage Act, that's just not, it's not generally in my wheelhouse. It's not what I deal with. This is a big deal because, again, who we have involved and the nature of the documents that we're talking about. And so in total, the government has apparently recovered more than 300 documents with classified markings from Donald Trump since he left the office. There's been a lot of talk from, whether it's from Donald Trump himself or from his camp regarding kind of potential defenses to these issues. And I tend to defer to, less is more, not really issuing statements, not revealing what your defenses are going to be, because, this is a criminal investigation and presumably it could lead to charges being filed. You'd like to think that criminal charges will not be filed against a former president. But if this is the investigation that's being conducted, then those are possibilities. And so there's been talk about this standing order by the president to declassify materials. At this point, as far as I know, there's been no documentation revealed that would indicate that any materials were quote unquote declassified. And in fact, I think there have been people coming out from his, administration saying, hey, we weren't even aware of any such order. The charges that we're talking about are obstruction of a federal investigation, concealment or removal of government records, and the last is the Espionage Act. And we're not talking about the portion of the act dealing with, spying and all that kind of stuff. There is a portion of the Espionage Act that deals with willfully retaining national security information that the possessor has reason to believe could be used to injure the United States or give another nation an advantage. So that's the portion of the Espionage Act that we're dealing with. And so those are the three charges that Donald Trump could potentially face based on the information that's been made public. Is there enough for him to be charged? I'd say, yeah, there is enough to just charge him. We've seen people prosecuted on way less information, but realistically, like I said, there's been a lot of buzz about this situation, but we are so early on in these stages, and there's a lot that can be done, presumably by his legal team, to avoid charges being filed in the first place. And so, again, there have been quite a bit of statements that have already been, made either by Trump or his representatives, saying that it wasn't Donald Trump's staff that actually packed these boxes. It was the General Services Administration. So there might have been some sort of mistake in terms of which materials were to go to Mar-a-Lago or be held, or what was supposed to get sent to the National Archives. There's also the idea that whatever documents that he did have were placed in secure storage. So it wasn't like they were just sitting out in at the bar, right? At Mar-a-Lago, these documents were apparently kept in some sort of safe space, not open to the public. We've also heard, something to the effect of, hey, if the Justice Department had just asked, I would have turned them over. So perhaps like some miscommunications issue. One other issue that's come out is whether the FBI might have, actually planted these documents. That's where, we start getting really just wild and bizarre in terms of, accusations. And interestingly enough, that's then turned into, a lot of his fan base, a lot of his supporters coming out and, bashing the FBI, and kind of puts them in a difficult position because that's the party that tends to, really back the badge and, all about, Blue Lives Matter and everything. So it's kind of a conflict. But anyhow, one of the other issues has been, if President Obama actually held on to documents too. So, that defense, hey, he did it too. And it's been revealed that Obama did not hold on to documents, did not hold on to classified files, complied with his obligations to turn over the documents over to the National Archives. And then again, this insistence that the documents were declassified. And so the interesting thing, and this is kind of the danger, if you will, in throwing out these defenses, is that it doesn't matter if the documents were classified or not in terms of the alleged violations with the obstruction, the concealment or removal of government records, or this Espionage Act violation. It's not going to matter necessarily whether they were declassified or not. So it's possible that they just weren't declassified. And number two, even if they were declassified, that's not going to necessarily be a defense. Obviously, if we're dealing with documents that are not classified versus classified, then, that's sort of a mitigating factor. But really, I just think the safest bet would be to just be silent on the issue. And so my advice to Donald Trump would be, hey, the Fifth Amendment is there for a reason. Just exercise that, rest on that and allow the lawyers to do what they do. The last thing you want as a defense attorney is your client, just sweeping your legs out from under you, making statements when you're trying to build a defense. There's also this issue in terms of the FBI being sort of weaponized and used as a political tool. I don't know if that's true or not in this situation. I'd like to think that that's not the case. But when we just look at how this whole thing started, again, with the National Archives making what I imagine to be numerous communications before turning it over to the Justice Department, and just an unwillingness to comply with them requesting these documents, that's what led to where we are. And realistically, there probably should be some sort of stepping in by the Justice Department when we're dealing with documents of this nature. So there'll definitely be more and more information that comes out regarding this story, and so I'll try and keep you posted on it. But if you got something out of this video, please show me some love and hit the like button. Make sure you subscribe to the channel and turn on the notifications so you never miss a new video when it drops. As always, I want to thank you so much for watching, and until next time, peace.